Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Unfiltered. Our last episode, we talked a lot about a couple of different topics such as men are trash, and we really wanted to take this opportunity to kind of expand on that discussion a little bit. So first off, we can go ahead and introduce ourselves. Once again, I'm Bilal.
I'm Nazish.
I'm Amina.
I'm Hannah.
I'm Masani.
Awesome. So one of the main topics of discussion, as I had mentioned earlier in our last pod with the guys, was all men are trash, and we kind of want to talk a little bit more about the flip side of that and why people say that in the first place. So there's a couple of different reasons, and I feel like we can all touch on them. And one thing that I really wanted to bring up first was how do we know if we're part of the problem or are we part of the solution? So maybe you guys can speak on that a little bit.
Are we talking both ends of it, like men and women? Like how are women part of the issue and how are men part of the issue? Or we just want to stick with one end?
I would say for the most part, overwhelmingly, men are either part of the solution or part of the problem.
For sure. I think you're part of the problem if you're sticking to things like bro code, right? Like your bro does something wrong, you're like, nah, I'm not gonna tell him off. I'm not gonna do anything about it. I think growing up, we've had a lot of this idea of like, even like ideas like bros over like fill in the blank,
Mm-hmm.
It rhymes, fill in the blank. And people, they tend to exaggerate that to an extent where as guy friends, like we cheer each other on instead of telling each other, yo, like you shouldn't have done this. That was wrong. And we build each other up instead of checking each other.
I would say, I think just generally speaking, when people talk about all men are trash, I think there's something to discuss whether all men are actually trash, but the real discussion that I think that is important to have is how can we be part of the solution? Because many times I would say people believe since they are not directly part of the problem, they are part of the solution, but that's not the case. I feel like if you are not actively doing your part to kind of reverse some of the, not just privilege as we have touched on in the last episode, but some of the toxic things such as rape culture and those sort of things, if you're not doing your part to reverse them, then unfortunately you may be part of the problem. I don't know. Do you guys agree?
I agree. I honestly think that at this point it's about men educating other men because we've done so much and we've worked so much to explain why girls feel a certain way. And when that stops working, it becomes like in order to become part of the solution, you have to be proactive about your efforts in educating yourself and others.
All right, so something passive might not be working. Like
Yeah,
you're just sitting
absolutely
around.
not.
Right. Even if you yourself are not doing these like terrible things, like like we had talked about earlier, like not getting consent.
It's not enough to just not do them. You have to go a step further, and when you see someone else doing it, you have to discourage it.
Definitely.
I feel like it's all like also going back on what Masani said, call people out. People make these like small little comments where they're like, why is that girl dressed like that? Why is she acting like that? Why does she put herself out there so much? There's also that. I feel like we don't discourage that tone with guys. I've noticed that guys don't really discourage that within each other. What do you guys think?
I
Do you guys
agree.
see that?
I mean, I think, like, even in the words of our president, like, locker room talk has become something that's so common, or saying something like, boys will be boys for stuff that should not be passed as something that, they'll just grow out of. Because doing stuff perpetuates things like rape culture. It perpetuates, like, this idea that boys can get away with doing things, but it's fine because they did it when they were young. And something that they did once or said once can be something that they forget about years later, but that's something that could be stuck on another girl's mind, or something that could be traumatizing even
Right, she
long
carries it
after
with
that.
herself.
Exactly.
Definitely.
I think, so we really preached a lot of like, Bilal and I, Jamal, Timur, Maz, we really preached communication, understanding, right? So, I mean, I'm glad we have some female perspective today. I kind of want to bring it back to the idea of men are trash, just because I want you guys to like kind of expand on where you guys feel like it comes from. Just so like, obviously like so guys around the world can understand. Because I think the hardest thing about it is that you may not buy into it because you don't believe you fit into it, but you also don't understand it, like fully understand it. In a lot of ways, I feel like we've highlighted it, right? Like there's issues that guys go through that you guys don't understand. There's issues that you guys go through that we don't understand. So I think it's really important to give me and Bilal your perspective. Like, what is it? Where does it come from? What is it about?
So I think part of what the men are trash hashtag, like where they come from, is that like it's kind of just to say that like even if you like as a man yourself are not sexist, you still benefit from sexist systems and like a society that was like shaped around the man, making everything easiest for the man. Like think about like the gender wage gap and other things to kind of just make it like that uneven balance. And so even if you yourself are not like a sexist piece of garbage, you still benefit from like those systems that are in place. And so it's not enough to just not be sexist. You also have to like actively work to make sure that you're trying to take down these systems.
And I think that's something we can get to hopefully on this pod, talk about solutions and how we can actually do those things to actively reverse that privilege, or reverse this systemic benefit that men have and many times take advantage of. And I think it comes right down to that. It's the fact that it's systemic. That's why when you would try to make the comparison the other way around, it might not, or definitely won't work. You know what I'm saying? Because women do not have any sort of systemic advantage over men. I don't want to say similar to, but something that comes to mind is just, white people in this country. And we had mentioned that on the previous podcast. It's a systemic thing. You can't compare it to something else. Like, for example, I'm a Muslim and I feel like I am discriminated against. It's really not the same thing, because this country is not built specifically on laws and systems that benefit, for example, white people or men in general. So I think that's what privilege refers to, and all of that falls under. So all of the other things fall under that category of privilege when we're talking about rape culture, when we're talking about victim blaming, when we're talking about ruining somebody's reputation. So.
Yeah, I think you're making a lot of good points. I think it's important that we discuss things like domestic violence and like revenge shaming. I think especially like one of those things that we see a lot as people that are in college. I don't know if I see it in college as much, but I feel like in high school, like the idea of revenge shaming. Girls, like I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I've definitely seen it with like female friends that I have, where like they'll go through an entire relationship, there'll be a breakup, it may or may not be nasty, but then the guy goes and he'll be talking trash about the girl, and that paints her in a less than favorable light for sure. And I think that's part of the umbrella of men are trash. It's not per se like everyone, but it is that it's these different issues that I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong for sure, like being a guy, check me if I'm wrong, but I think it comes down to like there's so many various issues that girls have with guys, whether it be in a relationship, at the workplace like Bilal talked about last week, on the streets with randoms that you don't even know. Do you guys feel like it comes from more than like where else do you feel like it comes from?
I just don't think it's that surface level, harassment that you can get from guys, but it's like you said, in the workplace or like rape culture. That's where it all stems from. Like these little jokes that girls make, like men are trash. I don't support that. I think that that's that just takes away from that defeats the purpose of men are trash umbrella, like where rape culture falls under it, harassment, those little like catcalling, that type of stuff. And when girls say men are trash so lightly, like I want to go back to the last podcast where one of the guys had mentioned there was a tweet where girls like just wake up and they'll say like good morning to everyone but men because men are trash. Like I've seen that happen so many times, and that just takes away from the whole purpose of that, and that's why people take it so negatively and so lightly.
Like we should probably be like caring about like the right things and talking about the right things. And like I think on the flip side of that, lots of times like personally when somebody would say all men are trash, like initially it might like offend like a man. But when in reality, is that the conversation that we should be having, or should we be having the conversation that we're having now, where it's more about what solutions can we do to reverse that, whether or not people think all men are trash? That might be irrelevant right now because it's not a big problem, not even close to the what's backing that statement. So
Dude,
I
feel like that. Ooh, my bad. I'll let you go after. I feel like that's one of the big issues. Though. I feel like, and we've seen it whether it be in this pod or in real life. I feel like everyone has so many different takes and opinions and everything, but the problem ends up being that we don't want to listen. We talk with our emotions, and we end up like just making a ginormous problem out of something that you sit down, you talk about it, and you could probably try and find fixes. You could find common ground, and just find that understanding, right? Like find that common ground where you both can stand on. You understand each other. And I feel like that's something that guys do wrong too, right? Like on the topic of rape culture, like we don't encourage females to go talk about it, to the point where I feel like a lot of people have come out and said that they feel very oppressed, like they don't feel like they should go talk because they'll go into like a police station and then like the police officer won't believe them, they'll throw stuff away, evidence is gone, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like there's so many stories out there where you see, and obviously like I can't talk either personal experience, I'm not even sure if I know someone who's been raped, but definitely just from stuff that you see, it feels like every time a girl goes to this serious issue, she's not taken seriously.
Right, and they're not, because like everybody will have like so much backlash. They'll be labeled for that.
Yep,
and
you get that. You get labeled with all the words that you don't want labeled. And it's kind of stupid, you know, because I feel like a lot of times it might come down to like it wasn't even the girl's fault, you know, and things took a turn one night and the guy did something that he shouldn't have done. And now, but the girl's shamed for it, right?
So
yeah, I feel like it just always comes back to like, why was she wearing that? Why did she go with him at night? You know, so I just don't get like why we talk about these things that the girl shouldn't have been doing what, and it's not really in her control. You know, she should be free to wear whatever she wears, do whatever she does, but she shouldn't have to take that extra precaution just because she fears that this guy will like rape her.
definitely.
And I think that comes from this kind of idea that girls are being held responsible for things that are not at all their fault. And that also comes from saying like things like when you say like, oh, if she wasn't there, this would have never happened to her. But it's like, why are we saying like maybe she should have taken this precaution, she shouldn't have been there, when we're not saying like men shouldn't do that? Like, how is it so like out of pocket? How is it so difficult to say that you have to go and blame the victim, to simply tell a man that if somebody told him no, he should have respected that?
Yeah, I actually did. I guess I do have a story. And this is something I'd read for sure. So, but this is like, it was college related. It was a girl's first semester on college. So she made like a lot of close friends, right? Like obviously having gone through college, you know, that first semester you meet a lot of random people and everyone just kind of wants to fit in. So they all make friends. Going to second semester, she was at like a spring break frat party. Everyone had decided to come back to her apartment. So it was like a group of close friends. And obviously like if you're close friends, you trust each other. And the girl, non-Muslim, but she must have gotten like very, very drunk. She went to her room, she knocked out. She told, like, they were watching a movie at her house. Like she told her friends like, yo, for sure, like finish the movie and then you guys can dip, just, you know, close the door behind you. And she woke up and there was a guy on top of her, and she like told the next morning, she told her friends, like her girlfriends, like, you guys knew like I was in the room, I was asleep. She talked to her guy friends, and it turned out like this guy that had raped her was a really big fraternity star, right? Like he was a big part of fraternity life. So the girls all like really worshipped him. The guys all really worshipped him. No one wanted to get on his bad side. And I feel like that's another thing that comes up. And, you know, whether you say it with celebrities or with people, it's kind of like that. We are starting to get to a point where we're not respecting the person that has been hurt. We're respecting the person that could benefit us more.
Absolutely. I think you made a good point there. What I would like to do about this specific topic before we move on to other topics, let's talk solutions for this. So I think, you know, as Muslims, we're sitting here, we're obviously discouraged from having, you know, relationships outside of marriage. But reality is reality, and this is something we have to talk about. You know what I'm saying? So let's talk about consent. Let's talk about solutions for that. I would love to turn to Amina to talk a little bit about that, I think.
Should I like define consent?
If you'd like, yeah.
Okay, so consent is basically just permission to go forward with anything. So you need a person's consent to like speak with them, to engage with them, to get physical with them, you know. And it's also it's very black and white. It's not something that's difficult to understand, and it can be revoked at any time by either party. So it's not just something that a woman can give and take. It's something that, like, if a man is uncomfortable, he can also revoke that consent. And like what we're realizing, that because of rape culture, a lot of men are kind of finding an issue like where they are not getting consent, and that's like where a lot of assault happens, is because consent was either not given or like revoked partway through, and someone's like, you can't take it back, or you can't change your mind, or things like that. And so that kind of like plays a really big part in it. And so obviously, if you're not somebody that doesn't go around like taking things from people without their consent, that's fine. But you know, you're not going to get like a prize, you know, for doing the bare minimum, because it's kind of just like common decency and like courtesy to just like get someone's consent. Like if you want to borrow somebody's laptop, you're going to ask for it. You're not just going to walk in and take it. And so the same thing goes, like, I hate to compare like victims to like inanimate objects, but it's kind of the same idea, is that unless you have like express like permission to like interact or engage with somebody physically and even verbally, then of course, go ahead. But if you don't, then you have to tread carefully.
And that applies to anything. And again, we're just going to talk explicitly. Like, even if you're not literally having sex, like right there, it's you have to ask for consent, whatever it is. You know what I'm saying?
It can be intimacy. It can just be like a hug, or you know, like a kiss or something like that. So like parents, younger parents, like millennial parents, are asking their kids before they like give them a hug or show them any kind of affection, and it teaches kids like a really young age that they have that autonomy, and they have that power to say no. And so that's like kind of causing them to grow up with this idea that like nothing that doesn't belong to them can be taken without somebody's like express permission.
Right, and nothing is implied.
Yes,
you know, 'cause-
nothing is consent is never implied. It is never implied, okay? And if you are unsure, then you need to ask. And if you don't ask, that's on you, not the person.
Right.
Okay, and then also, like, if we're going back to, like, sexual intercourse, then, you know, it's on you to get consent, but it's also on you to, like, ask. Like, are you comfortable? Okay, are you okay? Do you want this? Okay, and if you're not asking those questions or not even thinking about those questions, then you probably shouldn't be trying to have sex in the first place.
Right,
That's,
right. Right, you have to be ready to ask these things because it's not like in the movies where things just happen. You know what I'm saying? So you
it's
have to
never
ask
like that in
explicitly,
real
as
life.
dumb as that may sound. And again, we're talking about this again very explicitly, but it needs to be said because people unfortunately don't know these things, and then bad things happen, and the victim is blamed, as we were talking about earlier. So I think. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Okay.
And to touch on what Bilal said earlier, while he, of course, and I agree that Muslims are not supposed to have relationships outside of marriage, and that's what we're taught, and that's what we know. This type of stuff not only like occurs in marriage, but it's something that specifically within the Muslim community that's kind of pushed away. Like people refuse to talk about it, and the issue is people need to talk about it because beyond being Muslims, at the very root, we're human beings, and human beings make mistakes no matter how grave they are. And so we shouldn't sit there and say, well, that doesn't happen in our community. It doesn't happen, because unfortunately it does.
Absolutely.
And while there's punishment for that in the hereafter and with God, like for so long after, there definitely needs to be accountability in our community too. We need to teach our sons, and we need to teach uncles and fathers and stuff, because this whole creepy uncle thing should not be a thing at all, you know? And we need to teach men and girls alike that things like this are not appropriate, and that to perpetuate anything like that is extremely grave and extremely indecent. And not only is it indecent, but it's haram. So
Absolutely, yeah. And just to clarify, like, yeah, it might not be the reality for people like who are not in relationships. Like, great job, you're being like a good Muslim, you're not doing this stuff. But even when people are married, this stuff is happening. You know what I'm saying? Marital rape, like you said, is a very, very real thing, and everybody needs to be educated on these things.
Yeah, and not just marital rape, but like domestic violence.
Absolutely.
So I had a Muslim friend who just got divorced because her husband assaulted her basically the entire duration of their marriage. And it actually really upsets me because she's also autistic. So she is, she doesn't have all of her mental faculties, and somebody took advantage of her. And this was somebody in the Muslim who's born Muslim and like decided to get up and do this. And like that kind of stuff is really, really common. She knows a lot of women who are in her position who have also been like assaulted by their spouses. And that's why intimacy and everything, it doesn't just occur to people, like young people doing flings. It also occurs to somebody that's been married for like 25 years. Like my aunt and uncle have been married for 30 years, but they still like talk to each other before they, go ahead and do things, especially when it like directly affects them. And honestly, that communication is what, is gonna make their marriage go from 30 years to 60 years, inshallah,
Inshallah.
So that kind of stuff just has to be talked about.
Definitely. So we've talked. Did you want to go?
Yeah, can I just
go
add
ahead.
on
Yeah,
really quickly? I'm sorry. But I feel like we should also make it a thing that we should support these people. Like when we see someone getting a divorce, say because of domestic violence, marital rape, we kind of like really put them down, and we make them feel like they're just taking a really drastic step that they shouldn't be taking, and they lack that support from their own community members. And I feel like we shouldn't just stand back and just say like, okay, just let it happen, like it'll pass, like just communicate better, talk to your spouse better, and it'll like go away. And I feel like that's something that we as people, as human beings, lack, like that empathy for them.
furthermore, Islam really emphasizes that divorce is one of the rights of women. It was one of the first rights that were given to women, And in our communities, unfortunately, people will be like, oh my God, who's gonna marry her? Like, she's tainted. She's already been like in a relationship, like she was married, And they'll say like, and a lot of the times what I've noticed in my own community, I can't speak for anyone else's, but even in situations where there may have been an abusive husband, they'll be like, okay, well, what did she do to get him so mad? And it's like, how can you even say something like that? But unfortunately, they do say that, and then they continue to promote that for generations to come, because I know that these things might have been even more appropriate when our grandparents were around. Like hitting your wife, that was probably more like socially acceptable. They'd be like, oh yeah, me too, when they're talking about it within them. Like,
Right.
Yeah, my friend that got divorced, when she was sharing like her story with people, and she told them that she was divorced, the biggest the most commonly asked question she got was, "What did you do?" So people were constantly telling her, it's like, well, what did you do to make him? Because he also committed adultery aside from abusing her. And so, like, people's main question to her was like, well, what did you do to make him cheat? What did you do to make him upset or angry or anything like that? And so this kind of goes back to, like, victim blaming. It's like when somebody is hurt or assaulted or, like, in this kind of situation, instead of focusing on their actions that led up to it, talk about, like, the person who's committing the actual crime and hold them accountable. Because, like, a victim, all they have to do is kind of just keep themselves together, okay? And, like, the only thing you can be responsible is your own choice. But it's obviously not somebody's choice to be abused or to be assaulted. So it's kind of just, like, it's kind of ridiculous that we have this idea that, like, if something happens to, like, a person, you, instead of being like, I'm so sorry this happened, you know, that person is wrong. Instead, they're like, well, you shouldn't have been doing X, Y, Z. And that's kind of just, like, that's not really okay.
So we've talked explicitly what to do in, like, those specific situations of intimacy. Let's talk a little bit more about the culture that we had touched on earlier. So let's just say, like, you know, a bunch of guys are talking, and lots of times rhetoric is thrown around that is, you know, characterizing a woman as, you know, we all know the words that people will call them, and that kind of makes it seem as if it's okay to do these things because, oh, like, she does that. You know what I'm saying? Like, can we talk a little bit about that and how in a situation would other guys keep each other in check?
Yeah, this goes back to what Hannah said at the beginning of the podcast about locker room talk, that myth that, like, whatever is discussed among men, you know, stays among them, and it's, like, okay because it's not getting out or whatever. But no, because, like, that talk also, like, reflects behavior, and it's like it also, like, reflects what you are, like, willing to let happen, if not by, like, something by your own actions and by somebody else's actions. And so if you hear somebody calling a woman fast or loose or any of those really gross words, then, you know, it's kind of your responsibility as, like, his fellow man to speak up and tell him, hey, you know, that's not cool. And it's just, like, men need to hold other men accountable because it's the same thing with, like, white people need to hold other white people accountable because obviously they don't listen to people of color. It goes the same thing for men. Women have been trying since the dawn of time to kind of just, like, explain this, but they're not going to listen to us. They're going to listen to their brothers. So that's kind of.
Definitely, and that's what it's all about, like, being part of the solution, not being part of the problem. And I think that the problem with that is it kind of, like, blurs the lines between what people are talking about, and we really don't know everybody's story, so people could be saying it for a different reason. And the main reason that we're here to talk about today is the systemic one. And what we're trying to do is expand on it so we can really get the whole picture, because on our last pod we had touched on a little bit, but without painting the entire picture, we're not really going to portray why people say that in the first place and how we can be part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem.
We got our side, and it's dope to hear your side, obviously, you know, like, the realities of it, the stuff that you guys go through that Bilal and I wouldn't go through.
Absolutely.
And I think a big part of being part of the solution is, I know that feelings and emotions are raw, but, like, responding to men are trash with not all men is kind of just defeating the purpose, because if a woman is telling you men are trash, it's not likely a petty thing. She's probably been, like, incredibly hurt by a man to say that, because I know that some people throw it around for jokes or anything, but in my experience, especially as a rape crisis counselor, when I hear people talk about, you know, quote unquote, the hashtag men being trash, it has more to do with the fact that, you know, they were assaulted, they were victim blamed, they were not believed, they were, you know, assaulted again, they were given back to the hands of their abuser. So instead of being like, not all men, I think more about, like, how can I be an ally? Because if you say that you are, you know, I guess one of the good guys, then I guess put your money where your mouth is and step up and be like, well, how can I be an ally to women? How can I change that stigma, that culture? How can I help to get, because, you know, we say men are trash because right now, like, the bad collective few speak for all of you, and, like, your track record is not that great. But, you know, the few allies that we have and that we need are staying silent. And so that's kind of where, like, if you are not part of the solution, if you're not actively working to be like anti-sexist, same thing with anti-racist, then you are part of the problem.
And let's discuss a little bit like what it is that we like, what somebody might be offended by. So let's just say somebody says all men are trash. Initially, a man hearing that be like, hey, like you're like I'm not trash. But in reality, I think a more productive way of looking at it and kind of turning the conversation is be more offended of the fact that there are men out there that are doing these horrible things. You know what I'm saying? And trying to be a part of the solution is a way of kind of mitigating that. So
I also wanted to add on, like, the reason why I brought that up is to say that it goes both ways, like with guys and girls. Like, guys use those terms loosely, like going back to what we said, loosely. Girls use this, men are trash, very loosely as well. So it just happens both sides. Like, we just have to be more cautious of what we're saying and why we're saying it.
right, and we just have to be wary of what is reality. Some things are unfortunately on a systemic level. I keep using that word. I wish I had a synonym for it, but I don't. But that's the truth of the matter. And sometimes it doesn't work both ways, and other times it will work both ways, like on those individual cases. So,
And in honesty, I think that the phrase "men are trash" doesn't come from personal experiences. Well, while it does, and those influence it, it is coming from a more systemic point. Like what you touched on was very valid.
And
Go ahead.
and if it is petty, then that is such a small minority that it's probably not worth talking about. You know what I mean? So I think it would be better if we would all. I know that the last episode was called Meet in the Middle, but it might not even be Meet in the Middle, because any time somebody is kind of put at a disadvantage, it's like starting a race, but everybody else starts ahead of you. That sort of thing.
If you have weights on your ankles.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't meet in the middle for that. You kind of have to go the extra mile. So.
Yeah, and I just wanted to just touch a little bit on like this whole idea of things going both ways. Sexism and racism work really similarly in the fact that I personally don't think a woman can be sexist toward a man, because to be sexist implies that you have the power to oppress somebody. And the same thing goes for racism, is that you can't, nothing that you say or do, like nothing a person of color says about a white person is ever going to take away their right to have a job, have a car, have a life, have anything. And the same thing goes for women. Like, women can say men are trash or whatever, but at the end of the day, she has no power to put a man down, to make him lose his job, to make him lose his reputation and everything like that. She has no power in that. And so I kind of think that, like, that's where you say, like, meet in the middle doesn't always work. I feel like men have to kind of put in a little more effort, especially because women are so far, like, so low on the totem pole. So it's kind of just like.
So in that regard, I do agree that men do have to do a little extra work, but I won't say that women cannot put men in a bad situation or cannot make a man lose his reputation or lose his job, because, like, you most definitely can in certain situations. But at the same time, I completely agree with you in the regard that racism and sexism work in the same way, but in the way that it implies that you can't be racist towards white people because they'll always benefit systematically from racism, and you can't be a sexist towards a man because he'll always benefit systematically. He'll always make $1 for every 75 cents that a woman makes. He'll always have more work rights. He'll always have the ability to be taken for his word, to be taken seriously for what he accomplishes.
I'm sorry. I just want to respond to that. Just think about Christine Blasey Ford, and the woman that accused Nicholas Kavanaugh of sexually assaulting her. And just think about how she came forward. She told her truth, and he is on the Supreme Court. And think about Donald Trump. About 50 women have come forward accusing him of assault, and he's like been known to give hush money, and he is the president of the United States. So that's kind of why, like, yeah, sure, some guys' reputations can be ruined, but at the end of the day, they're still in power. They still are able to do what they want and live their lives. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Right. I think definitely both you guys have a point in talking about, like, an individual case. Sure, you could probably pick out something. Oh, like, this woman was so.
Yeah, and that's not to say that it doesn't happen. Like,
right.
Of course, and this isn't to say that women can't be liars, because, like, I know some liars, but it's just going to say that, like, at the end of the day, the systemic issue, that's not a lie.
Right. Like, what is the conversation? Which conversation is worth having? That's basically what we're talking about here. And on the individual basis, as you said, of course, it's going to be happening.
Yeah.
But and those cases, of course, need to be taken seriously. Of course, a man can be raped, and so on and so forth. But what we're talking about is more, again, I wish I had a synonym, on a systemic level. So.
I kind of want to add in, like, when I said it goes both ways, it's not necessarily like in a sexist way, but it happens. Like, it's something that we both all obviously have to work on. Like, a guy can disrepute a girl can disrepute a guy, but it is something that we both, it's like an issue rooted in both guys and girls. But that's not necessarily like the sexist aspect of it.
But in
Definitely.
that regard, also, while we say that it does go both ways, men can't be comfortable in knowing that, yeah, they can face up issues like that. They need to be more so like, they need to understand, and not just understand, but continue to act in a way that erases the fact that while it can go both ways, it's more likely to affect women.
Right.
And so, yes, we never want to discount what somebody says, like specifically if a man says something has happened to them. We never want to discount anyone's struggles, but we also need to make it clear and understandable by everyone that while men have struggles, women have struggles of a completely different regard that continue to affect them in a very serious manner. While men are busy worrying about a hashtag, like men are trash, women in that same regard are busy wondering, like, oh, will they be able to come back from maternity leave, or will they be able to get hired for a job, or why do they have to lock their cars the second they get in, like.
Right. And I think your point and Amina's point was that, like, a man might be raped, but just generally speaking, a man walking outside is not afraid of being raped.
Yeah, and that, see, a lot, like half of the calls that I get from the rape crisis hotline have been men. So obviously, I'm not trying to say that men
Right.
can't be abused and that they don't have like a platform that to speak on, because actually a lot of men are like discouraged from speaking about their abuse, and that's a huge problem. And I'm a big advocate for that. Like, whenever I talk to a male victim, I try to make sure that they know that they're heard and they're just as valid as a female victim. But yeah, I'm not saying that like male victims should be erased or pushed into the corner, because at the end of the day, rape is not really about gender. It's not about sex. It's about power. Okay. And the same thing goes for like abuse and domestic violence. It's not necessarily about, controlling somebody who is weaker than you. It is about like asserting your dominance and power over somebody. And that could be a man or a woman, because I'm sure there are a lot of like homosexual relationships where one man is abusing another man.
Right,
Okay,
definitely.
and that's just as valid as like a husband abusing a wife. And so we kind of have to take all of that into account as well.
Definitely. So just like to kind of wrap things up, one question I do want to pose to everybody is actionable steps going forward. So as a man, we kind of have to take into account all of these different issues, and not only apply the lessons that we learn from them in our own lives, but also hold each other accountable and the next generation as well. So just discouraging the culture of it. Saying those phrases that imply certain things about women. Learning about consent, as basic as it might sound, so many people don't know. And that's not an excuse whatsoever. Every adult should know. Every non-adult should know. But yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Just as we wrap up about paying it forward and kind of being part of the solution and in the next generation.
I think change always starts from somewhere, and the fact that our generation is even aware of this happening and our generation is actively speaking about this is progress in itself, because our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, these were probably topics that were so taboo they were never brought up. And it's up to us to make sure that we have relationships and children and continue to encourage like a more positive way of thinking and a more redefine roles between the genders and who's responsible for what happens. Because once you start blaming both sides of the gender, which while blame is deserved on both sides, once you start differentiating between what can be done and like labeling things as issues because of what has not been done, that's when you get a greater issue than what you started with.
Definitely.
I'm going to go last. I'm going to let you two go first. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this.
Honestly, like the biggest thing that I can encourage for men to do, especially with other men, is to hold each other accountable and hold yourselves accountable. Also, if you want to work in like disassembling the hashtag men are trash, then kind of just put yourself out of your comfort zone. Maybe take a course on like rape culture. They literally have classes on them. we actually have like an organization that was created by Muslim women. It's called Heart, and it's a rape crisis center for Muslim women, Muslim victims of abuse. And so like they offer workshops on consent, on health, on all of that. And so like it's predominantly women, but I think that, to be honest, more men could be filling these roles just so they can kind of understand where this whole idea of like victimology comes from.
Definitely.
I also do want to add on that we should be very careful and empathize with each other a lot more, and just kind of take care of each other. I feel like it's very important. We don't do that at all, whether that's guys with girls or girls with guys. I feel like it's very important to do.
Definitely. I think that's probably a good place to wrap things up, unless anybody else wants to say something. But yeah, I think some of the takeaways, like we said, instilling these values in the next generation and also our peers, and talking about these sort of issues and making sure they're educated on them. And aside from that, just knowing in the back of your head, we've said it so many times, and hopefully we can keep on saying that if you're not part of the solution, then you are a part of the problem. So hopefully you guys will catch us, inshallah, in our next episode. Thanks so much for watching.